All right, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for the next webinar in our quarterly webinar series. My name is Sarah Grimes. I'm the Director of Business Development at NYSARC Trust Services, and I'm excited to be talking today about when we're going to be using a pooled trust to protect assets. Last quarter, we talked about using the pooled trust for income. If you are looking to qualify financially for Medicaid services, you can spend down that income in a pooled trust and use it to qualify for services and be able to preserve that income to pay for monthly expenses. Today, we're going to be talking about situations where you might put assets into a trust to be able to preserve your financial eligibility for Medicaid, but also other means-tested public benefits. Before we jump in, I just want to remind everyone we are all muted and chat is disabled, so we ask that you please put any questions you have into the Q&A, and we will reserve some time at the end of our discussion to go through those questions. Closed captioning is available. You turn that on your end. And a link to these materials that are the PowerPoint slides, as well as some additional information about NYSARC's Trust Services, are going to be provided to you in a link that you'll receive in an email shortly following today's training. And if you watch this webinar and you know somebody else that might be interested, a recording will be available at our website, should be within about a week from today's training. And at the end of the training, you'll get a link to complete a brief survey. We ask that you please do take a couple minutes to provide some feedback and let us know about other topics that you may be interested in the future. So as I mentioned, we're talking today to people with disabilities, their caregivers, or professionals who may be assisting them, who have had a situation where someone is receiving government benefits and has resources that put them above the limits to qualify for those programs, right? People with disabilities who rely on these means-tested benefits. All right, sorry about that. Thanks for your patience, everyone. So this is very challenging for people with disabilities. It's very concerning. Their benefits provide critical, crucial services that they need to be able to maintain eligibility for, right? And so a pooled trust is one solution to allow individuals with disabilities to protect their ongoing eligibility for these services if they have assets or resources that are above the limits to qualify for those government benefit programs. Now, just to give a little bit of background on what a pooled trust is, for those that may be learning about pooled trust for the first time, this is an entirely legal arrangement that allows, this is a type of trust, it's a type of special needs trust that is designed for people with disabilities to give them a means to protect money that they have in their own name or money that they may be entitled to receive, and still remain eligible for those means-tested government benefits, right? It gives them a way to make sure that they don't have to impoverish themselves just to be able to qualify for the crucial services that they need to be able to live independently in the community and have a rich, full life. The trust is going to hold those assets, and in case of a pooled trust, those assets will be managed by a nonprofit organization who has a legal responsibility, a fiduciary duty to act in the best interest of the person who's receiving Medicaid or SSI services. That person will be referred to as the beneficiary of the trust. So you'll hear me use that term a lot throughout the day. And the goal is to allow someone to be able to have additional funds available to them above and beyond those resource limits so that they can provide for things that their government benefits don't cover, be able to fill gaps in services and pay for things that are, uncovered medical expenses or perhaps therapy services that may not be part of their benefits. And it also allows them to have a means to save that money for the future, right? Be able to work and earn some money and set it aside for something that they may want in the future, and be able to pursue hobbies, aspirations, goals by not limiting the means that they have available to them, which is ultimately going to give them a better quality of life. There are so many things a trust can pay for. We're going to talk about a lot of the examples today, but the main primary rules about what the trust can be used for is that the trustee is going to distribute funds for the beneficiary beneficiary's primary benefit. So items and services that are for that person, generally things that are going to improve their quality of life. And that trustee does have the sole discretion to distribute funds out of the account, because the trustee is responsible for also making sure that distributions from the trust are not going to negatively impact someone's financial eligibility for benefits. So when might you use a pooled trust to protect assets? So primarily, this is going to be a situation where someone is already receiving means-tested government benefits, right? This is going to be someone who's actively getting Medicaid for OPWDD waiver services, TBI waiver services, or other non-MAGI Medicaid services. It is important to understand what types of Medicaid benefits a person has. Some Medicaid benefits, if you're not accessing waiver services or you're not an SSI related individual, don't have a resource test. So it is important to know what type of benefits you have. But for someone getting Medicaid, or a lot of the times it is someone who's getting supplemental security income benefits. Supplemental security income benefits, a person can only have $2,000 in their name and continue to qualify for that program. And it's not only a program that's going to provide monthly payments to that person to help support their living expenses and their needs, but it's also something that having $1 of SSI helps qualify them for the Medicaid benefit. So if someone receives supplemental security income, they've got to maintain that supplemental security income benefit in order to also keep their Medicaid services, right? And so primarily a pooled trust is going to be used to protect assets when someone who is receiving Medicaid or receiving SSI comes into a sum of money, like an unexpected windfall, right? So you're getting an inheritance from a loved one. It could be a retroactive payment from Social Security benefits, right? You're getting a lump sum of money that's going to put you over the resource limits to continue to qualify for these programs. Now, there are some cases where you may be looking to qualify for benefits. And so, if it's a small amount of resources, or if you are a younger individual that's going to have the benefit of spending those funds throughout your lifetime, then you may also use a trust to help qualify for services. But it is generally going to be to protect ongoing eligibility for benefits. For example, last quarter we talked about using the trust to qualify to protect income, to get access to long-term care services like home care. If you're an older adult and you have assets that are above the Medicaid limit, you generally have more favorable options than putting those funds into a pooled trust, right? So you're typically not going to put funds into a pooled trust to qualify for Medicaid long-term care services, depending on your age, and we'll talk about that throughout our discussion today. It's also something that can be used to help avoid going over these resource limits when you have money that's building up in your bank accounts, right? And so commonly this happens when an individual is receiving government benefits and maybe they're working and earning some money, and that money is starting to build up. They want to be able to save it for the future and not have to spend it every single month just to be able to keep services. Right? And that certainly is an option if it's a small amount of money that you're receiving, or if you have a small amount accumulating in your bank account. You can use those funds, make purchases that are for your primary benefit to help keep you below those resource limits as well. Another common issue that we've been seeing more and more lately, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in our examples, are people who are receiving disabled adult child benefits. Right? So a lot of the times this is a person who is getting SSI and who still has to keep their bank accounts below $2,000. But when you start to collect on your parent's work record through the disabled adult child benefit, you're now potentially getting thousands of dollars a month in Social Security payments, which is great. It's there to help support you and your ongoing needs. But for some people, if you live in a supported residence, it may be very difficult for you don't have a lot of monthly bills or expenses to keep that money down every single month. So that could be a situation where you're starting to accumulate funds. And again, you have the option to spend them, and that can work in some situations. But sometimes it would be better to set that money aside, save it for a larger expense in the future, allow it to build up in an account where it doesn't count against your financial eligibility for benefits. And pooled trust can also be used by a third party who's looking to provide for the future of a loved one with the benefits, right? We want to leave an inheritance, not to them directly, but in a third party supplemental needs trust or pooled trust, so that we can plan for their future, ensure that any inheritance that would be intended for that individual can go to them in a trust and not interrupt their financial eligibility for benefits. So I want to talk a little bit about the timing, right? So how do excess resources impact a person's financial eligibility? When you receive a lump sum of money, it is typically income to you in the month that you receive it, or when you are earning money, or when you receive money from a DAC benefit, right? That's income in the month that you receive it. And it becomes an available resource the following month, so the start of the next month. So if you come into a windfall of money, you typically have some time in order to get it out of your name or reduce that money down below the resource limits in order to continue to maintain eligibility for services, right? And so the timing of that can be challenging if you're getting something at the end of the month. But let's say you get something, today is the 12th. If I receive a lump sum of money today on the 12th, I have until July 1st before that will be treated as an excess resource for my benefit eligibility purposes, right? So we have time to be able to deposit those funds into a pooled trust, for example, and protect that ongoing eligibility for services. Now, pooled trusts can be used to protect excess funds that you receive that become an excess resource, right? But it cannot reduce your countable income to be able to keep Social Security, disability, or SSI payments, okay? Specifically payments. It can protect ongoing eligibility for SSI based on your resource limit, right? Helping you keep your bank accounts below 2,000. But if you're working, the money you are earning that you earn when you work is going to count, and you could have a reduction in SSDI or SSI based on how much you're working. There's very complicated rules for those different benefit programs. But what we can do is we can protect the wages that someone earns that become an available resource the following month. Another important note for people who may be working and depositing funds into retirement accounts, those retirement accounts do count as an available resource unless they are in payout status. That may or may not make sense for someone, depending on how old they are, how much money they have in their retirement account. So if you're working with someone who has a retirement account, or you have one yourself, or you have someone you're caring for, strongly encourage you to speak to a legal professional and your financial professional about what options they have. You can also use other tools like an ABLE account as a vehicle to save for retirement, which is not going to count against someone's financial eligibility for benefits. So what are some of the benefits of choosing a pooled trust in these situations? A pooled trust is something that has already been drafted, and the legal documents are in place. They've been approved by the Social Security Administration and Medicaid for first party situations. And so it's very quick and easy to get started with a pooled trust. You can open one with about as little as $300. You're filling out an application to join the program, and it can be set up in about a week. So that makes it a really favorable option for people who may need to open up an account quickly, and specifically for those that might be looking to work with a professional trustee, right? So you're getting the benefits of working with an experienced nonprofit that understands the rules of government benefits in New York and has many years of experience making appropriate distributions from a trust in order to maintain ongoing financial eligibility for these services. A pool trust also offers you a team of people who are dedicated to managing the day-to-day assets in a trust, right? So when you're thinking about who is going to be appropriate to help manage my trust, you unfortunately, as the beneficiary, are not able to be your own trustee, right? So it could be a family member. A pooled trust is a great option because you've got a dedicated organization that just administers trusts. You've got a team that's available to you throughout the week to answer your questions, to help guide you through using the account. When you need something from the trust, you have a team you can go to who is acting in your best interest. And that can be really beneficial for helping families and helping individuals be able to manage these accounts. The other great benefit to a pooled trust, you're getting all of the services that are needed to manage a supplemental needs trust in one place. And you're working with an organization that has a sophisticated operation for managing the funds in a supplemental needs trust. So at NYSAR Trust Services, you have access to an online portal. You can log in, manage your account. You can have complete transparency into the current balance, money going in and out of the account. You can access monthly statements so that if you need any of that information to report to government agencies, all of that is going to be housed by the trust and there for you when you need it. At NYSAR, we also do a voluntary audit. Each year, we have an independent CPA firm audit our operations, and we have very strict controls to ensure that the money in your trust is protected and there for you to use. And we handle all of the tax filings and any sort of reporting to government agencies as needed. So again, these are services that if you were to set up a trust on your own, you may need to hire out for support unless your trustee, has the expertise to be able to handle those things. Another great benefit to a pooled trust, like I said, getting all your services in one place, is you have a nonprofit organization that is available to you to manage your account every day. And then you have a financial institution that serves as the co-trustee and manages the assets in the trust for investment purposes. Now, a pooled trust, the funds in the pooled trust are actually pooled all into one bank account so that we can invest that money as a larger pool, but your individual activity is going to be tracked in a separate sub-account. So sometimes I hear from people, oh, well, if I'm pooling my money with other people, does that mean that other people have access to my money? No. Your money is still in its own separate account, and we have a very sophisticated accounting team that is tracking that money and making sure that your funds are kept separate from the others in the pool. It's more of the benefit of spreading out the costs of the management of the trust and being able to invest that money as a larger balance. And that's another thing to be keeping in mind when you are putting funds or assets into a pooled trust. They are going to be invested, and those investments are subject to market fluctuations. Some other things you want to be thinking about when you are making asset deposits into a trust. Who you choose to serve as your trustee is very important, right? Because you are trusting that individual or that entity to manage these funds in your best interest. That trustee is going to have the ultimate discretion over distributing money out of the account so that we can ensure that the funds are used for you and your primary benefit, and again, to protect your ongoing eligibility for services. So you don't have direct access or direct control of this money in order to protect your benefits. If you could access this money or take money out of the account at any time, the government would count it as your money, right? So that is the protection that that the trust creates that allows you to put as much money as you need to into this account and still qualify for means-tested benefits. So we're never going to be able to pay cash to you out of the account, but we're going to purchase things or pay for things that are for your benefit out of the trust. The trust is irrevocable as well in order to protect your benefits, right? Again, if you could set this up and at any point say, I don't want to do this anymore, I want my money back, then that means that money is available to you, right? So it doesn't actually protect your eligibility for benefits. So when you're choosing whether or not you want to put funds into a pooled trust, you should be considering, what you may need those funds for, right? In some cases, you might be coming into a windfall of money, and perhaps there's things you may want or need that you might want to purchase first, and then perhaps deposit the remaining amount into a trust. But once you put those funds into the trust, they become the property of that trust. And so they're there for you to use throughout your lifetime to pay for items and services for your benefit. And if you're putting your own money into a pooled trust, Medicaid does have a payback provision that if you have the opportunity to use these funds throughout your lifetime, but upon your death, if there is money in the account, it typically does not go to your estate. It's going to either go to repay Medicaid for the services that were provided to you throughout your lifetime, or with pooled trusts, it's often retained either in part or in full by the nonprofit, and it's used to help other people with disabilities that are served by their mission, right? So another consideration, right? When you're thinking about using a trust, you want to be thinking about, for this particular individual, what kinds of Medicaid lien they may have, and what is the most appropriate vehicle for them based on, what they may owe to Medicaid later in life. So to walk through some of our particular programs, we'll go through what options you have to protect assets and kind of walk through, the initial funding and, what happens to the funds at death, right? So we have lots of different options for individuals who are receiving a sum of money. We can open up account, like I said, with as little as $300. Right? So that is a very easy, accessible way to be able to get funds out of your name quickly, and even if it is, a nominal amount of money. And in that program, most of the individuals that use that trust are going to have a Medicaid lien that's typically much higher than what they may have in the trust upon their death. The goal is to allow the individual to use these funds and spend them throughout their lifetime. And so in that program, 100% of any funds would be retained upon the death of the beneficiary. But we also offer another first-party trust where if you're funding with at least $250,000, you may have more funds available in your account when you die than what you owe to Medicaid. And so in that program, we would seek to repay the Medicaid lien first. If the amount in your trust upon your death is greater than what you owe to Medicaid, then we're going to pay what you owe to Medicaid, and then NYSARC will only retain 25%, and the rest can go to the remainderman that you name in the trust document. Another benefit to that is that for as long as the balance is greater than 150,000, you're going to get a slightly lower administrative fee for the trust to manage the account. You're going to have the same investment management fee for all of these trusts. And then we do also offer a number of third-party options as well for parents, grandparents, siblings, family that may want to leave funds to a loved one with a disability with very low minimum funding requirements, right? So it makes this very accessible for a family that may be looking for the support of a professional trustee. And because it's a third-party trust where it's funded with someone else's money, not the person who's receiving government benefits, there's no requirement to repay Medicaid. So with our third-party pooled trust, we do not retain any funds upon the death of the beneficiary. We would pay those out to the remainder beneficiaries as noted in your joinder agreement, which is the application to apply for the trust. And then we also have a program for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. That is very true to our mission. NYSARC Trust Services is part of the ARC of New York, and we provide direct services to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so this is a program that we offer where we actually at NYSARC do not charge for our services during the beneficiary's lifetime. So you are only going to incur that nominal investment management fee. And so because we do not charge anything during their lifetime, we will retain up to $25,000 upon the beneficiary's death. Of course, if there's no funds in the account, we won't retain anything. If there's only $10,000 in the account, we would retain $10,000. So many options to help individuals when they have excess resources or when a parent or grandparent may be thinking about leaving funds to them and they want to do it in a way that it's not going to jeopardize their financial eligibility for benefits. So to summarize, when we're going to choose a pooled trust, and there's many situations where you may use a pooled trust, but these are some of the most common. These are the things I want you to be thinking about when maybe you're planning for clients that you work with, or when you yourself are considering what options you have when looking to protect benefits or planning for the future of a loved one with disability. The number one thing is whether or not you're looking for a professional trustee, right? So there's options when you're looking to have someone provide trustee services. A nonprofit is a really good fit. right? This is an organization that has been dedicated to providing direct services to people with disabilities for over 75 years. A trust that has been in operation for more than 50 years, gaining the knowledge and the expertise to be able to manage the funds appropriately. So it's a very good fit when you don't have someone to serve as the trustee, but it can even be a good fit when you're just looking for someone to provide that support. A lot of the times, family want to be involved, but they don't want to take on the legal responsibilities of serving as a trustee. And so this is where that family member can be the family member, right? They can be an advocate, they can be a contact on the account, they can communicate with us about how someone wants to use the funds, they can be on the account to monitor it, but they don't have to serve as the trustee, right? The trustee is going to handle all of that reporting. It can also be a good option when you got somebody who has complex medical needs, right? And you're going to benefit from working with an organization that is connected to the different services available throughout the state that can help direct them or be a resource to you throughout the management of the trust. When we're thinking about what's the best option, we also want to consider the funding amount, right? So a lot of the times people think to use pooled trust when it's a smaller amount of money, and that can be a really good fit because, as we've talked about, pooled trusts are very cost effective and we have low minimum funding requirements, right? It can still be a good option for any amount of money when you're looking to get access to those professional trustee services. It is also important to know, at least for NYSERC Trust Services, that we only accept cash-based assets, right? So if you want to leave, let's say you're leaving an inheritance to your loved one and you want to be able to put a house as part of that, we would be able to receive the proceeds from the sale of that house if that individual inherited a home with their siblings, for example, and they were going to get some of that money, then that would be something the trust could protect. But we do not protect real property in our pooled trusts. And so if you have a piece of property you want to leave to a loved one, then you may want to talk to an experienced elder law or special needs attorney about what options that you might have. The other thing to consider when it comes to funding is when you're talking about money that might be building up in a bank account, you really want to think about, you can make repeated deposits into the pool trust as you need to spend down resources so that you can maintain your eligibility for benefits. But you want to make sure that it's enough money that it's going to be sufficient to maintain a trust account or be worth it to set up a trust account, right? So, again, if it's a small amount of money and it's not going to happen very often, perhaps there's something you need to purchase or, could buy that is going to get those resources down below the limit. You might also have other options like an ABLE account for some individuals. But when it's, a sufficient amount of money or it's going to be a recurring need to spend down resources, a pooled trust could be a good fit. And finally, it is the only option to be able to deposit additional funds after the age of 65. So when you're thinking about who are going to be a good fit for a pooled trust, when you're over the age of 65, unfortunately, you're no longer able to make additions to a first party special needs trust because those additions would be counted as income. You can put that money into a pooled trust once you're over 65, but it will be subject to transfer penalty rules. So it's important to keep in mind if you are over 65 that there is going to be that 5-year look back period if you may need nursing home care in the future, which probably isn't the case for a lot of people that might need to put assets in a trust after 65 in these situations, but it is something to be mindful of. The money that is spent on you for your benefit from that trust is generally considered as a compensated transfer, right? So you're getting a fair market value for what you put in. So they don't typically count what was spent on you. They would look at what was left at the time you needed to apply for nursing home care, Medicaid. And then the other benefit is for SSI recipients. If you are over the age of 65 and receiving SSI, a transfer to a pooled trust could impact your financial eligibility for SSI. You could become ineligible to receive that SSI payment for a period of up to a maximum of 36 months. And so that's a consideration based on the amount you need to protect and what you're getting from SSI. The funds in the trust can certainly pay for services that you need while you're waiting for SSI to be reinstated. But that is something that you should be thinking about when you are talking to someone who might be over the age of 65. So we've decided, we've assessed the situation. We decided that the pool trust is going to be a good fit. How is this going to work, right? So you can make deposits to the trust as a one-time payment. So this would be typically for lump sums, settlements, inheritances, benefit payments, having to spend down resources. And you can also set up recurring transfers from a bank account, right? So this could be a situation where you have funds that are building up and you need to offload those to a trust on a regular basis, or it could even be something, it's part of a structured settlement. And it's important to point out that when you fund a trust with resources and you then also have to make deposits of income or even just regular monthly deposits, you don't have to set up two separate accounts. You can put them all into one account. The trust could also be funded by a third party, and there is no limit on what you can contribute or what you can have in that account. So you can deposit any amount of money into a pool trust and protect benefits. The funds that are in the trust then need to be used appropriately, right, in order to protect ongoing eligibility. And that's the trustee's duty, is to understand your government benefits and understand the limitations of what it can and can't pay for. In order to access the money in the account, you're going to make a request to the trustee. So in our case, it's NYSERD Trust Services as the trust administrator. You're going to submit your request to the trust asking to pay for expenses that are for your primary benefit. And we do need to collect some form of documentation that is going to allow us to prove to Medicaid or the Social Security Administration what those funds are being used for. We typically are going to make payments to third parties. So we may make a direct payment to a vendor, which includes credit cards. So if you have a credit card, you want to put purchases on a credit card, you can send us the statement with the receipts for the purchases you'd like the trust to pay for, and the trust is going to pay off the credit card expenses. We can also make reimbursements to a third party. So if you have a family member who goes out and buys something for you, or if your agency purchases something on your behalf, they can submit proof of that payment, and then we can reimburse them. And those reimbursement payments can be made by a paper check, or we can reimburse directly to your bank account if you're willing to provide us with that information. Certain expenses may also recur on a regular basis for the same amount. We can set those up on an automatic payment, right? So if somebody is in the trust and needs to use the funds to pay for their monthly car payment, for example, that's generally going to be a set amount, we can set it up to be paid on a recurring basis rather than you having to submit a request each time. And when you have a lot of different options for how you want to submit requests to us, but certainly the fastest is to use our online portal. If you're comfortable logging in online, there is a form you complete and upload the supporting documents. That's going to get everything sent to us in good order, and it's going to allow us to turn things around really quickly for you. You'll also be able to track that distribution request all the way until it's paid within the online portal. We also have the option to email those documents or fax them to us. You will receive a packet when your trust is open, which contains the forms you need to make requests. And there are going to be specific individuals who you have the control to authorize who can submit requests on your behalf. And so that form needs to be signed by one of those people, and then you need to attach the supporting documents. Requests can also be sent by mail, and surprisingly, we still do receive a lot of requests via mail. So how do you set up the trust, right? So a pooled trust is available to someone who has a qualifying disability under the Social Security Administration's definition, or there are other ways that someone can qualify. They're going to fill out an application to join the pooled trust. This is called a joinder agreement. We're looking for basic demographic information about the individual. It's about a 9-page document, something that our team can walk you through. We absolutely encourage you to seek the advice of a legal professional. Again, when you're choosing to set up a trust to deposit assets, it is a big decision, and it is something that you should consult with a legal professional about. Then you're going to attach some supporting documents that allow us to verify who you are, what benefits you're receiving. If someone other than the beneficiary is signing that application, we need to see the supporting documents that accompany that, like a power of attorney or your letters of guardianship. And then you fund the trust, right? So this is, like I said, again, a trust that can be set up very quickly, typically takes about a week. Can be set up even faster. If you're in a situation where you need to expedite it, just please contact us, and we'd be happy to work with you. And you can fund the trust electronically from a bank account, which is a simple form that you fill out telling us how much you want us to withdraw from that account on either a monthly basis or as a one-time deposit, and attach a blank voided check. But a lot of the times when it comes to assets, it's coming from maybe a settlement or an inheritance where there may be a check that's being cut, and it could benefit that individual to have those funds go directly to the trust to avoid them ever hitting their bank account. And so if you are going to be funding the trust by check, you're going to want to make that check payable to the NYSARC Inc. Community Trust for the benefit of the beneficiary's name, or you can endorse it over to the NYSARC Community Trust for the benefit of the beneficiary's name. And it's really important, if you are funding by a check, that those checks are sent separately to a bank lockbox. So we have a new account deposit slip that you fill out to make sure we know who the check is for. It's pre-addressed to the bank lockbox, and you are able to fill out that deposit slip and insert the check and send it directly to our bank lockbox. So that is really important. That goes to the correct address. If you have your documents can be emailed to us, they can be faxed to us, or you can mail them to the address that's on the application. And please be sure that you only send deposit checks to that address, because it is a bank lockbox, so it cannot process applications, paperwork. And so if you do send the documents there, they'll need to be rerouted, and that could delay the application. So who can set up these trusts when you're looking to set up an account for someone? It can be set up by the beneficiary themselves if it's going to be funded with their own money. It can also be set up by someone's parent or grandparent. They don't have to be the legal guardian, but if there is a living parent or grandparent, they have the ability to set up a trust for their loved one. And then it's primarily going to be established by someone with the legal authority to do that on their behalf. If the beneficiary is not able to execute a legal document, it can be done by a guardian or power of attorney. And in some cases, we may need to go to a court to seek a court order in order to establish a trust on someone's behalf. A rep payee can fund a trust if we have someone with the legal authority to set it up on that person's behalf. But a rep payee does not have the authority to be able to execute a joinder agreement for someone, unfortunately. But what we often have is we have somebody who might have a rep payee who's managing their Social Security benefits. We said we have somebody that's bank accounts are going over that limit. They have maybe a parent or grandparent that can set up the trust for them, and then the rep payee can fund that account exclusively with Social Security funds. And this is going to allow them to use those funds for bills that are in their name, items and services that are going to give them a better quality of life. It's very unique to each person, so we could really never list all of the things that the trust could be used to pay for. It's going to be a conversation with the trustee. Each request that's submitted is reviewed on a case-by-case basis in the context of your benefits and what services you receive, what access you have perhaps to other things outside of the trust, and also in thinking about, we want to help make sure that these funds last for as long as possible. So we also have to be thinking about budgeting the money throughout your lifetime. There are some things that we can't pay for, typically related to the types of benefits that you receive. So we're going to have some limitations if you have supplemental security income, although we have fewer limitations than we've ever had in the past. SSI really, at this point, the only thing we can't pay for is shelter. Shelter expenses from the trust that are paid could reduce the amount of money that someone receives from SSI. And we don't buy gifts or pay for things that are for other people because it does have to be for the primary benefit of the Medicaid applicant. And so again, and then every trustee might have their own specific policies. For example, at NYSARC, we don't pay for alcohol, tobacco, firearms, bail, or restitution, right? So again, there are some restrictions to how these funds can be used because we have to report to government agencies, but it doesn't mean that you can't use perhaps other tools to pay for those expenses to make sure that we can get someone the best quality of life possible, right? So you have money outside of the trust you can use for buying gifts for other people or doing things that are maybe not necessarily directly for your primary benefit. And if you need to pay for housing, for example, it could potentially either reduce SSI or maybe you could use an ABLE account to be able to contribute towards those expenses without it reducing your SSI. And that's something that we're going to talk a little bit more about in our next quarterly webinar. So in the fall, we're going to be doing a presentation on special needs trusts and ABLE accounts and the difference between those, and they each have unique advantages. So we hope you can join us later this year for that topic as well. So real quick, we're going to walk through a couple of examples to just summarize what we've been talking about today, and then I'll turn things over to questions. So we've got Maggie. She's 68 years old, and she is receiving Medicaid services. She is coming into a large settlement that's going to put her over the Medicaid resource limit. Now, is this a situation where Maggie might benefit from using a pooled trust? Yes, of course. Like we said, she's over the age of 65, so unfortunately, she doesn't have the option to set up a standalone special needs trust at this point. And she has a lot of needs. She's going to want to be able to support her medical expenses as a result of this settlement. And so these funds are going to be put into an account that is there for her to use throughout her lifetime. Josh is 23 years old and he gets SSI and Medicaid services. So for Josh, he always has to keep his bank account below $2,000. As I mentioned earlier, this is a common issue that we see when someone is getting SSI and then comes into more money from their disabled adult child benefits. This is a benefit that's available to people who were disabled, I believe, prior to age 22. And it's where you're able to collect on your parents' work record. So collect Social Security benefits based on your parents' work earnings, right? And so you can be eligible for this when your parent becomes retired or disabled and starts to collect their own Social Security, or when they're deceased. They're going to be able to start drawing on that Social Security benefit. That's really important. It's a great benefit to someone to be able to receive those funds, but now it may put someone in a position where they're having a hard time spending down that money every month to make sure they stay below the $2,000 asset limit. Now, if they go over the $2,000 asset limit, and Social Security Administration recognizes that they're above that resource limit, they could no longer receive the SSI payment, and they would be required then, in order to maintain Medicaid eligibility, they could potentially have to spend down that income on a monthly basis in order to keep Medicaid. So it's important to know that even if Josh goes over that $2,000 resource limit, there is still a way for him to use a trust to keep his government benefits and to be able to maintain Medicaid eligibility. But ideally, we want to just keep his resources below $2,000. That's going to avoid him having to spend down his income every month. And keeping his assets below $2,000 will help keep his Medicaid benefits in place. And then it allows him to just make deposits when he needs to stay below that resource limit. If you have somebody you're working with who goes over that $2,000 resource limit and they end up having a spend down, you can just reduce their assets below $2,000 to eliminate that spend down. So great, many options for Josh that are going to help him be able to protect his ongoing eligibility for benefits and still be able to access that money. We did get a question in the chat about, can I forego the ability for my child to receive those funds? I'm not actually sure the answer to that. I would certainly recommend that you talk to a legal professional, but I don't think that it would benefit your child, right? Because that's less funds that they have available to them. It may mean that they're not getting as much from SSI anymore, but now they're earning more based on your work record. Good problems to have. So our third scenario, we have Mr. Brown. He is 95 years old. He lives independently in the community, and he wants to be able to access Medicaid for long-term care supports and services. He does not have an income issue. He meets the Medicaid requirements. He doesn't have a very high earnings, but he has saved throughout his lifetime, and he's got a CD that's worth about $100,000. And so he reaches out to the pool trust to see if this would be a good option to protect his money. Most of the time, the answer to that is going to be no, right? This is money that he would not be able to leave to his family if he were to put it into a pooled trust. And so there's typically more favorable options that he might have in order to protect his assets and qualify for Medicaid services. So this would be a situation where we would encourage you to speak to a legal professional about what options you have. There certainly can be situations where someone might choose to put that money into a pooled trust, but again, you're really taking a risk when someone's 95 years old. Upon their death, those funds would be retained by the trust, and depending on how long they use Medicaid services, they may not have a very significant lien. So that would be something that you definitely want to at least explore some other options. Our last scenario, we have Maggie. She's 30 years old and she's getting SSI and Medicaid. She doesn't have any family who can serve as a trustee, but her grandmother is leaving her $250,000 has left her $250,000 in her will. And this is money that's going to jeopardize her financial eligibility for benefits. Her grandmother was the one who cared for her throughout her lifetime, so she doesn't have siblings. She doesn't have anyone to serve as the trustee. And so this would be a great fit for a pooled trust, right? She's able to deposit that $250,000 into the trust, and she'll be able to use it throughout her lifetime. If there are enough funds left over in that trust upon her death to repay her Medicaid lien, it can be repaid and she can leave those funds to remainder beneficiaries. Or if the trust determines that the amount that's left in the account is less than what could pay the Medicaid lien, then it will go to the nonprofit and be used to support other people with disabilities that are served by chapters of the ARC of New York. So these are all situations where you may or may not want to use a pooled trust. I hope that helps to kind of summarize our discussion today and when it is a good idea to consider a pooled trust. We encourage you guys to visit our website, sign up for our mailing list to learn about trainings in the future.